This is Pastor Ryan Chen. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I want to address a very controversial critical race theory. Right now it's getting a lot of negative traction because several Republican-controlled state legislatures are trying to make sure that this theory is not taught in public schools. So do you know what critical race theory is? I thought I did. And then when I started reading on it, I realized that this theory began a lot earlier than I thought, in 1970s, and it began in the studies of the law, called critical legal studies. Its academic version has to do with the law and legal institutions. In short, the law is not so blind. That is to say that racial inequality is embedded in the legal structure that negatively affects racial minorities in their areas of school, banking, policing. Now, recently, as I was reading up on this matter, I read this article written by Stephen Sawchuk in Education Weekly, and he had this to say. He said, this academic understanding of critical race theory differs from representation in recent popular books. Why? What is one reason? And he says, well, scholars say much scholarship on CRT is written in academic language not easily accessible to K-12 teachers. Meaning, they don't quite understand what these legal scholars wrote. I mean, this is pretty typical, right? The lofty concepts of the academia, many lay people really do not understand. So they get a popular version that may not exactly look like is original from the academia. So this statement is not a surprise. The academic understanding of critical race theory differs from representation in recent popular books. Then what is actually taught in schools under the label of CRT? So popular version, the one that is actually taught to students. The same author continues, as with CRT in general, its popular representation in school has been far less nuanced. Far less nuanced? In other words, is more graphic. What does it teach? Same author. He says, a recent poll by the advocacy group Parents Defending Education claimed that some schools were teaching that white people are inherently privileged, meaning all white people. Well, looking at that photo, those are white people who live in Appalachian mountains and valleys, and they are some of the most poor people in the United States. So obviously, not all white people live with much privilege. Let's continue. While black and other people of color are inherently oppressed and victimized, that achieving racial good requires discriminating against people based on their whiteness, that the United States was founded on racism. So this is what CRT is actually teaching in schools, that all white people are privileged, and that it is the people of color, like black and brown people, are the ones who are oppressed and victimized, and that in order to level the playing field, you must discriminate against white people to fight against this long-standing racial inequality. Now, as a Christian, that there are oppressors and oppressed is biblically warranted. Well, it's all over Old Testament. Let me read just one verse. In Ezekiel 22:29, the people of the land have practiced extortion and committed robbery. They have oppressed the poor and needy and have extorted from the sojourner without justice. Now, when you look at that verse, you realize that the first group of people who are oppressed are the poor and needy. Right. People who are powerful tend to be people with money and political power, and they could oppress poor and needy. The second part, have extorted from sojourner. Other translation says aliens, so there could be some ethnic dimension to that. So no one is saying that race does not factor in the systemic line between oppressors and oppressed. Of course, it's a factor, but it is not the only factor, is what the scripture is simply saying. Now, at that point, the advocates of critical race theory would tell me this: you dummy, it's not an individual thing. It's systemic, right? So CRT is no longer worrying about individual idiots who are being racist, but the whole system is skewed. It is inherently biased against people of color. That's what they're talking about. Well, there are two main problems with CRT. First one is this. The systemic line separating the oppressor and the oppressed goes beyond the color of skin. Yes, as I wrote earlier, color of skin matters a lot, but it's not the only factor, and sometimes it's not even the primary factor. And two, the systemic line separating the oppressor and the oppressed is not static. Their role can reverse because while the color of skin remain the same, power can change hands. What does that mean? Well, let me give you an example of Mexico. I lived in Mexico for 11 years. I'm not an expert, but I know more about Mexico than average people who live in America who have never stepped inside Mexico other than to visit or on vacation. Now, Mexico, there's an incredible power called the narcotraficos. These narcotraficos, the drug cartels, have incredible grip on the totality of life in Mexico. They produce amazing amount of drugs. Right now, they are pushing in fentanyl over the border to the United States. And they have tremendous control or power of people, particularly gente rural pobre. These are campesinos, people who farm in the mountains, who have to live by the orders of narcotraficos. So they end up planting plants that are going to produce drugs. Now, narcotraficos is not the only reason why they do this. After the NAFTA treaty, it really affected rural farmers. So they themselves wanted to plant plants that would produce drugs. But with narcotraficos controlling the areas, they have no choice. There's a lot of oppression going on. And as more people who are poor join the narcotraficos, they're getting more powerful and more oppressive, and the people in general are getting weaker and weaker. Not only poor people, but working people in general in Mexico. That's a very oppressive structure, and it is very powerful. Why is that? Well, one factor, as I see it is induced by a very wide economic inequality in that country. Did you know that the net worth of one single person, Carlos Slim, is worth 6% of GDP, and that 10% of Mexicans own 25% of national GDP? So the gap between the rich and the poor is incredible. And there are other factors. So these are the internal factors that cause people to be so poor, where working for narcos and to be handled by them becomes an option. But there are a lot of people who would never look at that, but just blame the United States because they are the consumers. They say, because of you, America, they produce drugs. So they don't care, or they don't really think about what's actually going on inside Mexico. They only blame Americans for consuming drugs. Yes, Americans deserve a lot of blame for consuming so much drugs. You see, that's kind of what CRT is. Whatever the problem is in society, they blame white people, and they completely ignore what's going on in the community of people of color. For example, when a white cop kills a black person, that's a big news. When a black person kills a black person, that's no news. You see, something is going on within in that community. White people are not guiltless, of course. There are a lot of white people who need to be blamed for a lot of things, but they're not the only one who hold the card. There are a lot going on among the people of color, but it is completely ignored. That's CRT for you. CRT should go after unequal system, absolutely. But they should not ignore what's actually going on in the community of people of color, just like when they look at drug trade, they completely ignore what's going on inside Mexico. They only blame Americans for consuming drugs. That is ridiculous. Now, Let me give an example where CRT really went off the deep end. Who is responsible for enslaving Africans? Here's a politically correct but factually incorrect response. So-called a race scholar who teaches at university in an interview kept saying, and quote, white people stole black people from Africa. He repeated that at least twice or three times. Really? The following is politically incorrect but factually correct response, and I get this information from Ibrahim Kendi, the anti-race scholar. This is a man, I'm sure it's a decent man, but he said that white people adopting black kids is type of racism. So I'm down with that. But in his book, very long book, stamped from the beginning, he was very honest about who participated in the making of a unjust system called slavery. He said in page 20 of his book, African people whom the Muslims were trading as slaves. So he clearly recognized that Arabs were involved with slave trade, Muslims. This curse of Ham theory cursed back all the way to Islamic and Hebrew sources. You know how Noah cursed Ham, or let us say his son, Canaan, and that began the black race, the cursed race, that ridiculous theory. And he recognized that it came out of both Islamic and Hebrew tradition. And then finally, he quotes an Islam scholar named Ibn Khaldun, and he said something that is totally ridiculous, but he mentioned it. This Muslim scholar said, Negroes have little that is essentially human and possess attributes that are quite similar to those of dumb animals. I'm down with that statement. Abraham Kendi mentioned that to say that that is how racist mentality and ideology begin to be established. Yes, these are the reasons why slavery became an institution. And finally, I got this from a textbook that I had to buy and read when I studied at UCLA many years ago. It is called Racial and Cultural Minorities. And in this book, it says this: most of the 10 or 11 million people taken from Africa, mostly to be sent to the New World, were prisoners of war sold by Africans to European agents. So who are responsible for enslaving Africans? White people, Arab middlemen, and also Africans themselves who enslaved people in Africa to sell them to Arab middlemen and to white people. That is very, very historically accurate. You will never hear that from CRT advocates. You know, last year, Congressman from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she said being morally right is more important than being factually correct. Being morally right is more important than being factually correct. Well, actually, that depends. Let me give an example of factually incorrect statement that is still morally correct. War is hell. The Vietnam War alone killed 65,000 American soldiers. We should exhaust all means before we absolutely have to go to war. That's morally correct statement, right? We should not opt for war as our primary option. But that's actually factually incorrect. According to U.S. National Archive, the American soldiers who died in Vietnam were not 65,000 people, but it was actually 58,220. So off by a few thousand people. So that's not factually correct completely, but morally it still stands. But you see, when you do not have all the facts regarding the beginning of slavery as a system, then you cannot say morally anything that is compelling. Okay, some factually incorrect statement can stand morally, but not this kind of statement where you say only white people are to be blamed for slavery. Only white people can be oppressors. This is a kind of factual incorrectness that is useless for any moral purpose. Why is being factually correct important in this incident? It is a great antidote to critical race theory. With respect to the institution of slavery, the line between the oppressor and oppressed is not always clear as you saw. Actually, the beginning of slavery was between white and white. The white people from the West enslaved the Slavs. This is why the word slave derives from the word Slavs. The Europeans in the West enslaved the Slav in the East. Slave, Slav, white on white. And then there's white on black, of course. And then there's Muslim against black. That is Arabs against blacks. And then there is black against black. Thomas Sowell is formerly a tenured professor at UCLA for a long time. He's a brilliant scholar. This is what he said. In Africa, it was those along the coast who had the more advanced societies with strong and highly centralized black states. So the coastal states were much more prosperous. Much of that advantage was, however, used for the enslavement of other Africans from the interior. So Africans in the interior were much more backward, not advanced, and poor, not very powerful. So Africans in the interior were victimized by the people from the coastal land. The Igbos of Nigeria were among those engaged in the slave trade, says Thomas Sowell. The Ashanti on the Gold Coast, now Ghana, sold thousands of slaves to Europeans who offered guns and other things to entice them to do this. And these Africans in the coastal land were eager to do so, well, out of greed, and they were more powerful than Africans in the interior of Africa. In general, African slaves were captured by other Africans and sold to Europeans who shipped them overseas. African states that engaged in this trade achieved power and prosperity. So, black people in the coastal land became powerful over black people whom they oppressed in the interior land. Color is not always one that determines who can be oppressors and who are oppressed. And were bitterly discontented when the British ended the slave trade in the 19th century. So the ones who were really upset when the British Empire ended the slave trade were these Africans in the coastal land because they could no longer make money. Slave trade, it was over. Isn't that interesting? Why is being factually correct important in this incident? The exploitation of people of color, to the extent that it has happened, and it has happened, of course, does not fit neatly into one singular narrative, which is what CRT does. Only white people can be oppressors. Only white people can be racist. Many white people are, but that is also spread among Arabs and black people as well. Well, I'm Asian, so Asian people as well. I'm from Korea, and I know some Koreans are pretty racist. Of course, they're talking about system, right? But that's the issue. The systemic racism called slavery from its very outset was a result of greedy people with power from all races, white, black, and Arabs. And I dare say that not much has changed today. The so-called systemic racism of today, whether real or imagined, more likely the truth is somewhere in between, is also the byproduct of greedy people with power from all races. No question about it. White people are disproportionately represented in this group of powerful, greedy people, but they're not the only ones who are responsible for systemic racism to the extent that it exists. You see, it's very important for us to realize the universality of sinnerhood, that there is no one righteous, not even one. Romans 3:10. Yes, let's conclude this. Through the evils of slavery, apartheid, and segregation, black people have suffered tremendously. Although America is still imperfect, far from it, the playing field has been more level than ever before. To doubt that, you're not looking at our history. We have had our first black president, first vice president, unthinkable 40, 50 years ago. That's not something you can just scoff at. Not every person of color needs extra help. Some do, and they should get the right kind of help from the state or the church or nonprofit. And to the extent that systemic racism still exists, individual responsibility still matters, and that should not be ignored. A lot of successful people among the non-white people seem to indicate that there are opportunities out there. Although the system is not perfect, it's time to seize those opportunities. And for those who are so out of it, we need to help them. But the right kind of help must be provided. Above all, as a Christian, as a minister, I want to focus on the gospel. Come to Jesus and believe Him. And through the Holy Spirit, have a changed heart. And you will stop being a racist. You will stop being such an intolerant person. And you will start being Christ-like to one another, so that Christ can be exalted and society can improve. Only through a changed heart can society change.